Good morning. I'd like to welcome everyone to our June 4th, 2020 work session. And thank you everybody for taking the time today to meet. As we have previously discussed, we are extremely sad that our superintendent, Mrs. Bird, is elected to be retired here next year. And so it is incumbent upon us to begin a superintendent search. I did ask Superintendent if she would be so kind and sit in on these meetings, because I think as you hear the presentation today, I'm going to want her input as we go along. I feel that is so important. So without further ado, I wanted to present to you Ms. Andrea Messina, who is the Executive Director of the Florida School Boards Association. And she has graciously agreed to come to us today and give us an outline, essentially, of what a superintendent search looks like. She has done many of them in the years that she's been there. And hopefully everybody, board members, received a copy of the PowerPoint that I received from her this morning. And so that at least that would give you something that you can make notes on and so forth as we go through the presentation. Once again, I thank you for being here today. And at this point, I'd like to turn it over to Ms. Messina.
Thank you. And I do want to say it's good to see everyone's face. I really miss my interactions with board members. Typically, I'm all over the state and in all sorts of districts, and now I'm sort of confined to my living room here. And so it's just good to interact with people and see the live and friendly faces. Your chairman asked me to come and talk with you today about what are the steps involved in conducting a superintendent search. And as members of the Florida School Boards Association, we do this workshop pretty frequently whenever there's a change in leadership or a suspected change in leadership in the superintendent position in districts. And so I'm here today not at all to try to get any business that FSBA should do your search. If we want to talk about that, we'll talk about that at a different time. What I'm here today is to kind of tell you, here's what all's involved. And so then you need to kind of determine what your next steps are. And we may or may not be involved in them. But any questions you have along the way, I hope you'll ask me, raise your hand or something, so whoever's moderating here will call on you. But I'm happy to take questions along the way, and certainly I'll answer any questions after if any of you want to give me a call and talk about anything specifically. So I'm going to share my screen here, and we're going to walk through this presentation so that I can share all the kind of pertinent information. First thing I do want to mention to you is that for this year, we have been doing quite a few superintendent searches. This has been one of the most active years in changes in leadership in school districts. We completed a search in Volusia not 6 months ago. We completed a search in Flagler not 2 months ago. In fact, the Flagler superintendent started the beginning of this week. We are currently doing searches in Sarasota, Escambia, and Martin. So we've actually will have conducted 5 within kind of a 6-month period. So there's a lot going on. In addition, Marion County has conducted a search, and so too has Hillsborough. So there's been a lot of turnover in superintendents, and that's just a context I wanted to kind of get out there. There's been a lot of turnover. So there's a lot that's involved in conducting a superintendent search. And the first thing I want to mention is that throughout the entire process of conducting a search, there are some things that are consistent throughout, and that is everything regarding a search has to comply with the Sunshine Law, public records, and you have to allow for public input. One of the reasons I say that right up front is because in other states, superintendent searches are part of the work that is done is allowed to happen in executive session. And so anybody that's from a different state that may be familiar with that process and ability needs to be clear that in Florida, that is not the conditions under which Florida searches work. So everything has to comply with the Sunshine Law, public records, and allow for public input. The first thing that you're going to have to look at is a timeline. So we know in general, when Superintendent Byrd is wanting to retire. So from that date of retirement, we start working backwards, and you figure out how much time, if any, do you want to have an overlap with a new superintendent. Based on that overlap date, you go to a selection date. Based on the selection date, you back up the entire process timeline. And I'm going to go through some of the things that are involved in that timeline in just a minute. But we really start with the end in mind. When do you want your new superintendent to start their work? And we work backwards from there. Things that you have to incorporate into your process timeline are things like, and again, we're going back, starting at the bottom here. You start with the start date, move to the transition. So we build in, some people want, so for example, I'm going to use Flagler as an example. Flagler hired their superintendent a month before the start date so that there was some overlap. The person they hired happened to be in the next county over. She was able to come in 1 day a week and work a full day with the current superintendent for transition planning. And so they allocated a month for that time. Prior to that, there's the hiring process. Between the hiring and the transition, I need to mention there's some negotiation on contracts. So you have to build in some contract negotiation time. Prior to the hiring, you have interviews. Most districts want to do face-to-face interviews. Sarasota's interviews are scheduled for the first week in July. We're not quite sure if that's going to be able to happen face-to-face with all candidates, but we're going to do our best. And so depending on how many candidates you have, if you have 3 to 5, a 3-day period is great. If you have more than 5 you want to interview, you're going to need more than 3 days. So we have some of those things to consider. Whether or not you want to involve your community in an advisory committee capacity in any way, which typically would be that there's a cross section of your community that might get the applications first and then compare all of the submissions to what the board said they were looking for and put forward a smaller pool rather than the full pool of candidates that the board might want to continue to consider. So if you want to do that, you've got to give your community advisory committee time to work. Before the community advisory committee can do their work, you have to have the advertising period. Typically, we would recommend between 6 to 8 weeks. Sarasota was under the gun. They did, I want to say, at the most 4 weeks. They actually had 31 final applicants after that time period. So it's not impossible to have a shorter advertisement period, but we recommend a little bit longer. Before you can advertise, the board has to have spent some time in conversations and dialogue about what the board is looking for with regard to qualities and qualifications. And before that, typically the board will conduct community input sessions to hear what the community is looking for, take that input to come to the board's agreement. Once the board has their agreement, the advertisement can be written, then you advertise, then the applications come in, then the community advisory, then the interviews, the hiring, the transition, and the start date. So there's a lot of things and they all sort of domino together. One of the first questions we typically get from board members is this going to be a local, statewide, or national search? And so we look to the board to answer that question. I will say, and I tell every board this, if you have an internal candidate that you believe is qualified and that the board would like to serve as the next superintendent, there is no reason to go through the whole superintendent search. Many districts build in development capacity for future leaders. I don't give you Charlotte County as an example. Their current superintendent, gentleman by the name of Steve Dionisio, was their assistant superintendent for curriculum. And when the superintendent that was working there decided to retire, he had been developing Mr. Dionisio to really take over that role at the board's direction. So when Dr. Whitaker retired, the school board just named Mr. Dionisio superintendent. They didn't have to go through a search, and then they began the transition. So that's what we would call a local sort of effort. Some districts have more than one local internal candidate, in which case You can do a small interview process or something like that. But if you have someone in the district that the board can support and the community supports and you believe should be your next superintendent, it's not necessary that you do a full-on search. There are reasons you might want to, but there might also be reasons you might not. So we've seen it work both ways. Some people only want to limit a search to the state of Florida. I would say, with regard to advertising, you can certainly limit it to the state of Florida, but with regard to accepting applications, you will get more than just the state of Florida people who are interested. So you will get applicants from out of state. You can make as one of your requirements that they have Florida experience, but certainly there are plenty of people who have Florida experience who are not currently working in the state of Florida. So there's some nuances there that you're going to want to consider when you start determining how and what your scope is going to be. But by and large, these days, because of the internet, every search is a national search, and you're going to find candidates from all across the country who apply. We've got some data that we maintain for our searches, how many states are represented, and I can share that with you at a later time if you're interested. But typically, you'll get about 13 to 15 different state applications from different states and several from Florida. When we talk about local input, this is one of the things that the board really needs to spend a little bit of time talking about, because most districts will want to do some sort of written survey. And you can do that Survey Gizmo, Survey Monkey on the platform on your website, however you want to do it. And then most districts will also want what we consider targeted input sessions. So it's face to face forums, if you will, community forums and focus groups where you ask the questions, what are the qualities you're looking for a superintendent? What are the strengths of the district? What are the challenges of the district? So that the board then has a real full picture of what the community believes, so that then you can formulate your opinions as a board about what the next superintendent, the most important skills and qualities of the next superintendent are. And I'll just give you an example. In I'll start with Manatee County. They had a superintendent several years ago who left with very short notice. They had to have an interim and then they had to hire. But one of the most important qualities that their community needed at that time was someone with strong financial knowledge. Their district was in a little bit of a financial um, challenge with some insurance programs that didn't go as they expected. And so they were specifically looking for someone with financial acumen. Whereas in another district, it might be someone who can turn around schools. In another district, it might be building community support. And what you need right now in a superintendent can be very different from what you needed 5 years ago or what you may need in another 5 years. So ideally, you're going to have leaders who are clearly going to have skill sets in all of these areas, but you're going to hear pretty clearly from your community what the top priorities are. It's amazing to me when we conduct some of these community and staff forums, the consistency of concerns. It's almost across the board. You can point out these are the 5 big things that a district should be looking at. And then you also want to consider, if you want to have, as I mentioned before, a community advisory committee that will in some ways vet some of the applications. I do want to speak briefly about the applications because I have never been involved in a superintendent search where you didn't receive applications from people who really don't meet the qualifications that the board set forth. So I just kind of want to make you be aware of that. And the community advisory committee really helps to filter some of those who really aren't qualified out. There are people who maybe are straight out of college, 1 year teaching, think they can be a superintendent, and that may not meet the qualifications that the board puts forth. So community advisory committee can help to vet through some of those things. When you start considering the qualities, both personal and professional, that you're going to be looking for and advertising for, some of the things to consider are things like years of experience and type of experience. This is important because in some communities, there's a very strong commitment to wanting someone who has been an educator, someone who has been a principal in a school, and someone who has been a district leader in school districts. In other districts, they want to know that someone has had executive leadership experience, but they don't necessarily think it has to come in the form of a schoolhouse or a school district. They might be willing to consider someone with military background or someone who is an industry leader in any sort of business capacity. So, really talking through that and understanding what the board is willing to accept for experience and what the board might prioritize with regard to experience is an important conversation for the board to have. We talk about comparable size district. You guys have a pretty large district. If someone is coming from a district, and remember that Florida districts are much, much larger than the average national school district size. So you will get applicants from superintendents who are superintendents in a district of 500 students or 2,000 students. And you're going to want to talk through if you believe that that experience is going to meet the needs of your district or not. Maybe you want to consider them, not rule them out, but prefer something else. But some people really are specific. They only want people who have served in comparable size or demographic type districts. You're also going to want to talk about formal education. Most require masters but have doctorate preferred, although sometimes doctorate is required. So formal education is a consideration. Soft skills goes to the media presence, communication skills, those sorts of things. And then again, back to the question of what does your district need now? What kind of leader do you need for today to take your district into the future, which may be different from what you needed a few years ago or different from what your district may need in 4 or 5 years. When you start to talk about these things, you're also going to want to have a conversation as a board about appropriate compensation for such a person. And one of the reasons I brought up the number of superintendent changes in the most recent year is because we keep a database of all the salaries that when those new superintendents are hired, the salary and benefits of those people. And in order to stay competitive, you're going to have to analyze where you fit in with regard to your number of students, your budget, number of staff members, things like that, because failure to offer a competitive salary and benefit package can limit your applicant pool. And I also want you to be aware that in many districts now, most districts with which I'm familiar, the district has offered moving expenses for the chief executive to come to town. So those are things you're also going to want to spend some time talking about during the process. Um, as I said, most searches these days have between 30 and 50 applicants. You're going to have to decide how you want to either determine semifinalists and or finalists for interviewing. You may decide that you want 10 semifinalists and 3 finalists. You may decide that you don't want to limit the number of semifinalists, but that maybe you want to keep the number of finalists to 5 or fewer. So there's some strategic conversation around how do you determine who the semifinalists will be and how do you determine who the finalists will be. I will tell you that in Flagler, I got to keep it straight. In Flagler, they chose not to have a semifinalist process. They went straight from the applicant pool to we're going to interview these finalists. And that's fine. That's exactly what a board can choose to do. But you're going to have to talk through that so that everybody knows right from the beginning how that's going to play out. Um, I recommend that you consider to try to keep as many as you can in a pool, because typically, if you have 3 finalists, one or more of them may eventually withdraw because they get an offer somewhere else. Most people who are looking to be superintendents are looking to be superintendents and they're ready to make the jump. And so you may not be the only district to which they apply. However, what I find really interesting and actually comforting is that most districts, the candidates really think through whether they are a good fit for that district or not. And so, for example, people that might apply in Marion County might be very different from the people who apply in Martin County, because there's a different demographic, there's a different need, academic need, that sort of stuff. And so it kind of depends on the expertise and the area and the way that the applicant sees themselves as being able to make a positive and lasting change somewhere. People really, my experience is that candidates really think through the district, and you guys being the size that you are, and with the number of schools that you have, the number of employees that you have, that's going to attract people that have experience with those sorts of numbers and those sorts of like they'll look at the number of schools you have that may need some turnaround, and people who might be turnaround specialists. Um, People really take very seriously whether they're going to apply or not. So that's really the message there. Um, when you get into the interview stage, typically, and again, these are things you need to discuss, typically the school board would do what we consider a group public interview. Just like a school board meeting, you all sit either at the dais or at a table. Each candidate comes through one at a time. Each candidate has hour and a half or so with the board as a group. Typically, those interviews are going to be aired, just like this workshop is being aired. And then each candidate would typically have individual one-on-one interviews with each board member. So, for example, if you had 5 finalists that you were interviewing, you might have 5 to 7 hours of board meeting group interviews, and then the next day you would have 5 one-on-one interviews, 1 hour each, so that you can get to know that person. Because the truth of the matter is, when you're hiring a superintendent, it's the single most important responsibility and job that a school board is ever going to vote on. Because that is your curriculum leader, your district leader, and so meeting each candidate one on one, it's important to develop relationships and see who you can develop relationships with. Um, During interviews and prior to interviews, your HR department will typically have some level of involvement because it's HR related stuff, and they will also have some guidance. So, too, will your legal department, because there are some types of questions, as you know, that are unacceptable legally, and also because we want to make sure that we're following all of your district policies when you're hiring a superintendent. You don't want to violate a district policy on the one most important person in the district. Well, I don't want to say important, but the leader of the district, you don't want to violate a policy when hiring that person and follow policies on others. Um, Typically, when you do invite candidates in for their interviews, you would include within that time frame, which is why I said it's usually about a 3-day window, highlights of your district. So you'll want to discuss as a board what those highlights might be. Highlights of your community, again, you'll discuss as a board. You want to consider the spouse and significant others of your candidates, because they may have some specific interests that they want to learn about before their spouse, who's the candidate for you, can really commit to the community. And typically, you might want to consider involving some community partners to serve as hosts to take people on these sorts of tours and highlights and show them your community. So these are, again, there's a lot of logistics in bringing in people just for interviews, and that's not even hiring yet. And then the big question everybody wants to know is, how much does it cost? Well, the consultants themselves can cost anywhere from $30,000 to $60,000. They do a whole lot of work and logistical planning. Typically, your consultants would be expected to be on site for things like your input sessions with community members, your focus groups with community members, provide survey. Uh, uh, Information platform questions. They will do all of the interfacing with candidates until they come in for interviews, all of that sorts of stuff. There are costs associated with advertising, depending on how, when, and how long you want to advertise, costs associated with travel of the candidates coming for interviews and or the consultants coming for meetings. If you're going to have receptions where the community can meet candidates. There are costs involved there, and there are certainly costs involved in doing some of the legal background checking to run some of the background checks on the candidates. So that's just kind of an overview of the sorts of things that you need to start thinking about. I recognize that it can be somewhat overwhelming because there's a lot to consider along the way. But whoever you might consider working with or um, helping you along the way, and that's not to say your own staff can't do it, because some staffs have done it. It just becomes very overwhelming for them. We don't recommend it, but that's up to you. So I'm happy to answer any questions that anyone has. And I
Thank
want
you
to,
so much, Ms. Messina. I really appreciate you taking the time to be with us today and certainly to give us an overview. It is quite the process, but we have to move forward. So at this time, board members, does anyone have any questions?
I'm trying to stop sharing my screen here too. So um,
It's okay.
I'm sorry. There
There
it
we
is.
go. Perfect. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, any questions?
Um,
Raise your hand so I can see it. Miss Reynolds.
Oh, down there.
Sorry. Hello. How are
Hi.
you doing today, Andrea? It's so good to have you with us.
Thank you.
I have a little bit of kind of the timeline. You mentioned we would start from the going backwards point, from advertising to actually making the offer. How long is that usually run?
You know, I should have said that, and I appreciate you bringing that up. Typically, we recommend 6 months is a good timeline. You can go a little longer or a little shorter depending on your needs. Sarasota right now is really crunching it into about a 2.5 month time period. But then we've got Martin and Escambia, who you may or may not be aware, but they heretofore had elected superintendents and they're transitioning to appointed, and they will have had 18 months. So 6 months we think is a good thing to consider.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Miss Reynolds. Miss Fields?
Hi, Andrea. It's good to see you.
Hey, Kay.
I have quite a few questions, so I don't know how you want to take it. In reference to COVID-19, you were referencing a lot of the districts having to go through this process. Has the process altered because of that? I know that we're now in phase 2 as it relates to being able to have groups of more than 10, but I'm just curious about how that looks as far as bringing them in and having group meetings and stuff like that.
Well, let's go back, because some of the like the phase 0 and the phase 1 started back in March. So March and April, what we found was that these people who are candidates for superintendent at that time said, I can't even think about applying for another job. I've really got to focus on the district that I'm in right now and help them through this pandemic. Because of that, in Sarasota County, we pushed the pause button. They were supposed to have started advertising 2 weeks sooner than they actually did start advertising. And so out of sensitivity to the community and what was going on, we pushed the pause button. We waited about 2 weeks. The reason I brought up the fact that they had 31 candidates is because we did not know if people would still apply or if they would, just not. But once the decisions came out that school would be out for the whole year, because you might remember we were going in 2-week sort of decisions. It was extending 2 weeks, extending 2 weeks. Once they finally made the decision that it was going to be for the whole school year and people had a better understanding of what the consistency was going to be, then they were able to start thinking of applying. So we were very happy with 31 applicants for Sarasota. I know that Marion County had some people withdraw, but their interviews were right at the beginning of the pandemic. And so I think we've moved through that. And based on the phone calls I've been receiving from people who are ready to be superintendent, they feel like they can move forward.
Okay, thank you for that. Now, can you expound a little bit on the community advisory committee and what that looks like and the makeup of that committee, please?
Certainly. When a board decides that they want to use a community advisory committee, there are a number of different ways to populate that committee. In St. Johns County, for example, when they used a community advisory committee, they created a list of about 20 community organizations or partners and said, we want a representative from, for example, the ministerial association, the nonprofit community, higher education, whatever those categories are. And then they reached out to those organizations and let those organizations appoint who they wanted to serve in this role. They also had, for example, a teachers union, support staff union, an administrator, and those groups determined who was going to serve on the community advisory committee. In other districts, Escambia, for example, they decided they wanted 25 members. They have 5 board members. Each board member got to appoint 5 people. Now, their conversation was that they needed to appoint their 5 people who resided in their own member districts so that they made sure that the community had a cross section. We typically would suggest that board members could maybe appoint 2 to 3 members, and then there's a pool of those organizations that you want to make sure are represented, so that it's a combination of board member appointees and community organizations that are already partners with the district that you want to guarantee their voice is heard. And so it just depends on the board's decision, but there's any number of ways to populate that committee. I want to say in, oh gosh, one county, and I can't remember, they actually took applications, people who were interested in serving, and then they made appointments from those applications. So it can go any number of ways.
Okay, thank you. The next question that I have is, do you have a list of consultants that's available for superintendent search outside of your group?
No, we don't necessarily do that. However, they're easy to find. There's 2 or 3 other groups that work in Florida. Marion just used one. Hillsborough used one. I mean, I can give you their names, but I don't keep them on a list because, you know, that's technically our competition, but they're out there and they're easy to find. And I can certainly tell you which districts to call the chairman of and find out.
Okay, and then my last question for right this minute is, you referenced that one of the things that we needed to be mindful of is having a competitive salary for the superintendent. Do you have any idea as to what the average salary is for a school district outside?
Yeah, we actually keep a database of that. And, you know, that's one of those proprietary sort of documents that I can certainly give you. I wouldn't necessarily want to give it to you in a public meeting because some of those other people, you know, they call us and ask us for that information. And I think it's their job to do. So we keep a database. I will tell you that one of the things that we put in our database very specifically is the superintendent's salary that is reported to the State Department of Education, because that way it's the official salary and it's not based on, it doesn't change throughout where people can say, where'd you get that number? We always have a place that we can point to of where we got that number. With all these new superintendents, I will tell you, for you guys, the salary you're going to determine may be slightly influenced by when Sarasota hires their person, when Martin hires their person, and when Escambia hires their person, because that may give you a better scope, because you guys are kind of populated in the middle there. But yes, we definitely have that information.
Thank you. That's all I have for right now, Ms. Cunningham.
Thank you, Ms. Fields. Any other questions for Ms. Messina? Well, I would just like to say thank you so much once again for outlining this huge task that we're about to undertake. And I will be contacting you at some point in time. Oh, Mr.
Billy has a
Townsend?
question. He's not just saying hello.
Yeah, I just
Muted.
I couldn't find the hand thing, Lori. I'm sorry. I apologize.
it's okay.
I wanted to come back to the question, the internal candidate search question. If there's not someone identified specifically, but there is a preference for an internal candidate, for instance, how would you advise addressing that? Like if there's not a clear heir apparent, but there's a preference for someone familiar with the contours of the district. I mean, like would that be something covered in the overall main search, or could you do like sort of a limited search internally? How would you address that?
Okay, so what I would recommend is that the board has a workshop to discuss, because let's pretend you have 5 members of your board. It's possible that 3 of those members really want to do a national search, and 2 of those members say, oh, we have somebody internally. It may or may not be an agreement of the board. So the first thing you do as a board is have a conversation about, do we believe we have the internal candidates that we want to serve in the future? Now, some superintendents and some boards sort of, again, let's talk about, I'm just going to do it for simplification purposes. Maybe we have a superintendent and 3 deputies or 3 assistant superintendents, and you want to consider the next superintendent to be from among those 3 assistants. Okay, so first you discuss as a board, do we want our next superintendent to come from one of our 3 deputies? And if the board is in agreement on that, then you create what I would consider sort of an interview process, a modified, I wouldn't call it a search, but I would say a modified process where you could interview those 3 people as a board. You would follow some of the same steps, but not all of them. You might not need an application. You might not need meet and greet the community. You might not need a number of the steps along the way. But as long as the board agrees, yep, we've got 3 internals, one of those 3 is who we want, then you just create the process to meet the needs of that limited scope.
Okay, thanks. That's helpful.
Thank you, Mr. Townsend. Is there anybody else? Okay, once again, Ms. Messina, we thank you so much. I will certainly be in touch with you as the process goes forward. We appreciate your time and talent today, and we will say goodbye and thank you, and hope you have a wonderful day.
Thanks, and best wishes to all of you. If any of you have any questions, you know, you can always call me or anybody on my staff. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
And I'll exit now.
Yes, ma'am. That would be super. Okay, so our next order of business would be that we received some letters, namely 2 yesterday, late afternoon, evening. And I'm sure, does everyone, with a show of hands, can you just let me know if everyone has received them and read them? Can everybody put their hands up if you've received them and read them? So I make sure I'm in context here. Okay. So
Madam Chair, I may have, I'm not sure which letters you're referring to.
if you'll look in your emails, you should have been copied
I've
on 2
received a number of letters, so I don't know.
Okay, one from Mr. Wiggs and one from the Coalition of 100 Black Women in Polk County.
Okay, I have those, yes.
You have those. Okay, that is what I'm referring to. And so I feel it is incumbent upon our board to discuss this and find a time and a place perhaps so that we can hear what the community wants to say to us. So I have not responded to any of them yet because I wanted to bring it up this morning to be able to let them know a date and a time. So I'm open to any suggestions. I have 2 options just to throw out there to start the discussion. Number 1 would be to welcome anyone to come to the June 16th meeting and speak openly, or to schedule a separate meeting to hear the comments of our community regarding the retirement of Miss Bird. And you all may have other ideas as well. So I just throw those out there as a place to start. Ms. Reynolds?
Sorry. Do we know when we'll be able to meet in person and not on a Zoom meeting?
I do not know that, but I would anticipate, personally, I'm thinking in June, because now that everything's opened up in that phase 2, I mean, businesses and other places are open. So I would like to say we would meet in person in June, but since it's so close, I would think by July, we would be able to definitely meet in person.
Okay. I think that a lot of, judging by the number of emails I received, I think we
Yes.
probably need a pretty large space to be able to social distance and allow people to come speak. But I would like to do it not just having, Susan has a beautiful voice and reads our emails wonderfully, but I think that this is something that the community should be able to speak for themselves.
And I totally agree. Okay, Ms. Fields, thank you. Go ahead, Ms. Fields.
I'm trying to unmute Ms. Cunningham.
It's okay.
I don't think that we need to try to have it at the 16th board meeting, because if my memory serves me correctly, that is a graduation, I believe, in the evening.
It is.
And so I would think that we would want to have it on a different day when we can give the community the time and the attention that's needed.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Fields. Other comments? Anyone else? Okay, so then what I'm hearing is we would, Mr. Townsend?
Well, I guess I'm a little perplexed. I think the next meeting is appropriate. I guess I asked this last meeting. I guess I'll ask it again. Is the superintendent intending to retire? I'm not in a position to try to like argue somebody out of their retirement. I don't really understand what. I guess I just don't understand. Could someone help me? I think having folks come to a meeting and express their point of view is entirely appropriate. But if there's going to be some change of heart, perhaps that should be discussed. I'm just a little confused. Sorry.
Well, thank you, Mr. Townsend. The way I see it is incumbent upon us when we receive emails and comments that folks want to come and address our board.
Right.
I believe we should do so. So I don't think that the 16th, I didn't think about it until Ms. Fields explained, but it is a graduation date. So we're not going to have a whole lot of time for public comment, I'll be honest, at the end of the meeting. In order for everybody to get to the graduation, particularly set for that date. So I think it would be helpful if we had a separate meeting. For those of you that want to attend, certainly it's up to you, but I really feel like we need to do that and allow the community to voice whatever they want to voice. I don't know, other than what I received in 2 emails yesterday. So let me continue with comments, and then we'll go forward with that.
But I have a question about that. So does that mean the search process does not go on until that meeting happens?
No,
because
it does not.
Okay, because that is what the emails were asking for.
Well, I don't think with the timing of things and with the superintendent being gracious enough to stay until February, that was at my request, I think originally. Am I right, Ms. Bird? She was wanting to leave at the end of the year. And when having done the superintendent search before, I realized it takes a good 5 to 6 months. So my hope was to be able to offer someone a position. That's just me talking, but you asked, so I'm going to tell you. My perspective would be to continue with the search, be able to offer somebody a position in and around November, Thanksgiving time, in order for them to be able to accept it, give their district enough time, everybody go off for the holidays, and then maybe that person start, in January, and have the overlap, which to me is so critical these days, to be able to have that communication time. So that's why I asked her if she would be gracious enough to consider staying on through January, possibly February, depending on how that goes. And Ms. Bird was gracious enough to say, absolutely, I understand. So we still have to move. I can't wait.
Okay.
I don't know.
Okay. That's the question I was.
But really,
asking,
it's not up to me. It's up to the board.
Hold on, just a second. the emails we've received that we're responding to specifically asked that the search not move forward until this meeting had been held. So I was sort of perplexed about. So if we're going to move forward, then that's fine. I don't have any issues. But I thought you were saying let's not move the search forward until we have this meeting in accordance with the email. So that's not what you're saying.
That is, but I am one person on the
Okay.
board, so
Okay, that's
you
fine.
all can pipe up. My thought was that once we talked with Andrea today and we understood it, we're probably going to need to talk. I was hoping to maybe have a few minutes at our work session on the 16th. I'm not sure. Ms. Bird and I have not had a chance to look at that agenda, but perhaps to start, having a 30-minute every time we meet. And then through the summer, we're going to have to increase that to get moving. So, but I work at the pleasure of the board. I simply chair this. So if somebody sees something differently, but that's kind of where I'm at. So Billy, I can't really answer it specifically because I work for y'all. I'm 1 out of 7. So if the group wants to stop it, they need to speak up today until this meeting. But if I don't hear that, then I'm going to continue to move forward because I have to meet the timeline.
Oh,
so
agreed. I'm in favor of moving forward. I was just a little confused about what you were saying.
Okay. All right. Now, Ms. Reynolds. Nope. Ms. Miller.
Oh, sorry. I was
okay.
Unmuting. I was just going to suggest that maybe we and I know the 16th meeting is going to be crammed because of graduation, but if maybe we could have a short conversation discussing an RFP for
sure.
consultant group, and then hopefully we could have maybe meet June 30th because that's after graduations to hear the public's comments, and then at that time be able to determine which consultant group we're using. That way we are hearing the public's comments and concerns and what they're looking for before we choose a consultant group.
So you're saying we would have a short discussion on June the 16th regarding creating an RFP. I can get with Andrea to get a few names for you, including their information. And I'm hoping I can have that ready for y'all to discuss perhaps. And then you put a date.
I just said June 30th just because it's a Tuesday.
Yeah.
But I don't know. And I think that probably if we're posting an RFP, that a week is probably a quick turnaround, not to mention, I think it's still running into graduation. So the 30th
yes.
get us past graduations.
Yeah. I was hoping we could move it. Hold on, let me get my calendar up into July, sometime after the 4th, like perhaps the 7th or the 14th. But I don't know everybody's vacation schedules. We're here this summer, so I'm not sure.
I could do either of those.
You could do either of those? Well, we'll get to that here in a minute. Okay, other comments? Ms. Miller?
Sorry, I had to unmute. I appreciate that comment about listening to the community before we choose a consultant group. And I do think it's important we listen to the community. I've received 2 emails and I've reached out to one of the parties already. And I think I think maybe the 16th is appropriate. I wish we could have people call in and not have Susan read them. It's a little bit, it's hard for her to read that, and it doesn't come across well it's not received well by the public. Not her particularly, just the process of someone reading their words. Because we need to be very, we need to confirm what what the point of the meetings are, and the public needs to be heard. But from who I talked to from one of the emails, it was even confused what the Bartow meeting was about. And this kind of was generated from that. And this person hadn't spoken directly to our superintendent to confirm her wishes to retirement. And so I was confused because the only communication I've received is we have a notice of retirement and I want to help this person. We need to move the district forward. And if we're looking for our superintendent, she's looking to retire, we need to help in that process and not hinder it. But the community input is very important, but I want to make sure if we're going to we want to make sure the message is, we want to hear from the community and helping choose a group to help the search group or whatever that process will look like. but we've already moved on. So I don't want to be disrespectful to the people in those emails. If there's a message that they're trying to relay, they need to do that at the 16th meeting, either in writing again. And I only have 2 emails. So if Mrs. Reynolds has others, please forward or send them to the chair. But give them that opportunity ahead of time, because I don't want the community to have a preconceived notion that we've stopped in the search process. But we are open to hearing whatever their concerns are. So maybe public comment is always available on the 16th and other meetings. But if we are meeting later in June or the 1st of July to talk about search committees or search processes or who will choose, they need to understand where we are at that time, so we don't, send the message to come in and we're starting something new. I think being clear in our messaging is important. It's important to the community and it's important for us. So I guess that's my concern today. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Miller. Ms. Fields?
Okay, my take on the letters that I received, and probably the same ones that you guys received, is that it's more than dealing with the loss of a superintendent, which would be Ms. Bird. It's wanting to come before the board and to share their thoughts on how we need to move forward. That's my take on it. And I think that it is going to be very imperative that we allow them to come and to speak to us in a public meeting, not on no Zoom call. They need to come so that they can, again, be heard, and their value and what they have to say, that we're willing to listen to that. We might not agree with whatever they have to say, but we need to give them the courtesy of allowing them to come. I think that it needs to be in June. I don't think it needs to go into July. That's when we start having vacations and all the other stuff. Don't mean that we can't look at the companies that we might want to interview as far as being our consultants, but I think that it's going to be very imperative that we not sit on this, and that we get it done within a reasonable amount of time. And I don't think the 16th is going to be the time for that, especially with us having a graduation. My understanding is that we already started our day earlier because of graduation. We usually have our work sessions at 12:30. We're having it, I believe, at 9 or 9:30, and then having our board meeting at 12:30, and then trying to get to the graduations. I don't know what graduations that's on that calendar, but I know that we have some. So that's my take.
Thank you, Ms. Fields. Mr. Wilson?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Well, like you, I've been through a number of CEO searches. It's not at the school district, but with other organizations. And I'm in agreement with you. There really are 2 parts. One is the planning part, and we need to move forward with that part. The second part being input from the community. And I appreciate Ms. Fields' comments. We do have some folks who want to address this, and we should, I think, allow them to address this sooner than later. But we, in the meantime, I think we should be moving forward with the planning piece of it. And the second thing I'd like to add, and again, Ms. Reynolds, please excuse me. This is just my obsessiveness for details. I don't think we're going to involve an RFP. I think what we're going to do is hire a consultant who's going to help us find folks to come into the district, and those are the folks we will theoretically talk to and interview. But I think it's going to be incumbent upon us. I think what they're going to say to us is, you figure out how you're going to do this. You figure out who you want to be involved in this process and how you want to involve them and things of that nature. So ultimately, I think we're going to have to break that piece out and do that on our own. So I think you're right, Madam Chair. I think we have to move forward with the planning part of it. And that doesn't mean that folks who are concerned shouldn't be talking to us right now. Certainly they should, but we shouldn't stop that planning piece. We need to be moving forward with that.
Thank you, Mr. Wilson. Ms. Miller?
Thank you. And I think as far as the early as the 16th, I think I just wanted to make a point that everyone is welcome to give community input. And this will not be the only time to give input. One of the letters specifically requested that we stop and not accept a request for retirement. And that was what I asked, I was confused on, and I did ask the superintendent who hasn't confirmed, but I did ask Wes, You know, how do you stop someone who's, because I want to honor the request of the emails. If they're concerned, I want to hear from them before we do some kind of acceptance, but this is not a resignation to accept. And so I want to give those people time to give us their input, especially either currently on what they're feeling, which could be individually to us, or calling into a meeting. But again, to be a part of the search process, that will be so important. But I just want to clarify that the request was to stop what we're doing. And I don't know that we are able to do that at this point. I am not going to I'm going to stop my dogs from barking, hopefully, but I'm not going to request, you know, I don't know that it's even a legal matter to stop someone's wish to retire. So that was my question. But I do want to give every opportunity available to our community, either to reach out to us individually or to come and talk at our meetings. And again, for the community forums, which I was a part of 10 years ago, and it's very important to have community input. So I want to have multiple opportunities for our community to give input, not just singular. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Ms. Miller. Yes, and I totally agree. I think we've got to, from basically hearing from everybody, I think the thought is to move forward. And certainly I can try to research those consulting firms before the 16th, maybe present those to us. And then we will have to have, you know, a workshop to discuss them once they come in. That's, yeah, I'll answer questions. Just give me a minute to finish. And then we'll definitely have workshops to discuss those and move forward. So I hear your point and well taken. Next person is Mr. Townsend.
I'm not sure how this would work with the scheduling, but why don't we have a search kickoff meeting next week? We invite anybody who wants to come to talk about their point of view, and then we, as the board, we each get 10 minutes. We can set ourselves whatever to kind of say what our thoughts are about moving ahead. You know, we might find that we have some common overlaps and common elements. You know, we're not doing anything out of consensus. You know, we're not, right, but it's a way to have the public be able to talk to us. I mean, for one, I'm happy to do that meeting in a real meeting. Does phase 2 apply to us? I don't, you know, I don't mind. I'll show up in a mask and do it in public if we want to do that. Again, I'm not sure how that works with the graduations, but I'm kind of concerned about the delay. Like, you know, we're going to have meetings to have meetings to have meetings. You know, I think it might make sense to have a public kickoff in which the board can give its thoughts, and then that kind of sets the tone for moving ahead on how we go about hiring a consultant, if we do, or if we, you know, just what the approach is. I mean, I think that'd be helpful for context. What do you guys think about that?
Thank you, Mr. Townsend. Ms. Reynolds?
I just wanted to first clarify, Lynn, when I was talking about an RFP, that was to get a consultant. It may be an interview process or something like that. I just was saying getting requests for, or getting proposals from different consultants, not to choose who our consultant would be. The second thing is in regards to Mr. Townsend's comments. I'm a little concerned about doing anything in the next 2 weeks, just because I think we have a graduation every day at 4 o'clock. And I know that though it is weird times and a lot of our people are working from home, we do have a lot of community members that are still working a regular schedule. So I feel like this meeting should probably be a 5 o'clock meeting where people can attend. But we have graduations every day at 4 o'clock. So I don't know how we would be able to do both for the next couple weeks.
Yes, thank you, Ms. Reynolds. Mr. Hill?
All right, can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Thank you for the opportunity to weigh in today. I think I can maybe shed or bring a perspective from a long time employee of Polk County Schools. I think myself, as well as quite a few employees, along with community members, have unabashedly held out hope that we could convince Ms. Burke to reconsider her retirement. And so I think the letters and some of the other things that we're hearing is the community, along with employees, wanting an opportunity to be heard And some of that, I can guarantee you, even as of yesterday, there was talk about, is there any way we can convince Ms. Bird to stay? We all respect the work that she's done. We have great respect for her leadership. And so I think that's part of it. So as a longtime employee, I think they're hopeful to get in front of the board to try to have those express their views, be heard, and to somehow, some way convince Ms. Bird to stay.
Thank you so much, Mr. Hill. Mr. Wilson?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. And thank you for that clarification, Ms. Reynolds. You're absolutely correct. We should get started on RFP for consultant if in fact that's what we want to do. So I would agree with that as well. So I appreciate that clarification.
Thank you, Mr. Wilson. Ms. Fields?
Okay, I just wanted to make sure I checked the calendar for graduations, and Ms. Reynolds is correct. We have graduations every day next week. So I think we need to look beyond graduation time, and the suggestion that I think Ms. Reynolds gave on the 30th would probably be a good day to invite the public to come. By then we will have figured out how phase 2 works within our school district and within our meetings, and we should be able to accommodate those requests.
Okay, so what's the pleasure of the board? Can we go ahead and set that next meeting for June the 30th then? Can somebody raise hands? Are we good for the 30th? How many can make the 30th at 5 p.m. so that the public can attend? So I only have one hand up.
Sarah Fortney can.
Pardon?
Sarah Fortney can make it.
Sarah can. 3, 4. I can make it 5. Billy and Lisa. Okay, so can we set then that public input meeting would be scheduled for what day of the week is that, Ms. Reynolds? Is that a Tuesday?
It is a Tuesday.
Tuesday. Okay, June 30th. And then are we going to set it for 5 p.m.? Is that good for everybody? So that folks who still work can make it. Okay, I at least wanted to do that. We have some other hands raised. Mr. Townsend?
Yeah, I'm fine. I'm fine with that. I just was trying to expedite things. I mean, do we think? I just want to make clear if we're starting our meetings on June 30th, we think we're going to be able to do this search and get everything done in time to have somebody in place. I mean, everybody's good with that. Like, I mean, it's mostly just a question of timing. On the question of people coming and speaking to us about, their point of view on it, I don't think that's a question at all. Everybody's always welcome to come. I mean, that like there's not a, you can come say whatever you want. That's where you're elected board. I think I was just trying to clarify what was being asked. And then I do suggest that we structure it a little bit in that it's public input, but it's also context for the board. I think each board member should get sort of 10 minutes or whatever of kind of contextual point of view on what they're looking for, because I'd be curious to hear from the other 6. I mean, I have some thoughts of my own, and I would ask that we build that into the meeting. Is that acceptable?
Well, you always have the right at the end of any board meeting that we have. I call on each of you to express your board report. So during your board report, you're welcome to give out any information that you choose. That will not change, because this will be noticed as a regular special board meeting, perhaps. I don't know if there'll be other agenda items to vote on.
Yeah, that's fine. I wasn't sure what the structure of the meeting was.
Oh, yes.
Was going to be. No, that's
just like on the last one. It didn't have all that in there, but I still built it all in to the board meeting, because I feel like any time that we meet as a public body, we have it's important that each board member have an opportunity to weigh in and give their board report. So that will be handled the same way, if that's okay with everybody.
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Townsend. Ms. Reynolds?
Yes, I would just request that we maybe save our comments till after we hear the public comments on what the direction that they're looking at for a superintendent.
Sure.
I just think we should, if we're going to take 10 minutes each, that we should let them talk first, because there's 7 of us. So
Yes.
Okay.
Sounds great. And that doesn't mean, that does not mean that we have to each take 10 minutes. I doubt that I'm going to be preparing a 10-minute speech. I want to hear what the community has to say. And then I take that information home. I think about it, I sort through it, and then perhaps I would have public comments after that. But I'm there to listen and learn from what the community has to say to me. That's pretty much my perspective. So I just didn't want others to feel that you had to have a X amount of minute speech prepared for the end of this upcoming meeting. Ms. Miller.
Thank you. I just want to quickly remind us about messaging, because what John Hill said is kind of what the emails were saying, that they wanted to convince the superintendent not to retire, which that would be great. And we could start talking about moving forward without all of this work that we're now beginning to do. But that conversation needs to be had with the superintendent. This meeting, I think we have now just discussed, is what the community wants for us to do in a search. So let's be very cautious, because after Bartow, I was shocked because the messaging of the Bartow meeting was different. Some people thought they were there because we were intending to fire a superintendent, which was never my intent, or the board had never mentioned that. But for some reason, they were, that was what they were given. And so we always want to hear from the public. I don't want to stir. There's no reason to create controversy where there is none. So if John Hill and other staff are working diligently, we appreciate that, to keep working on trying to change someone's decision to retire. But this meeting will be to hear about how we're going to move forward and the qualities they want to see and continue that the superintendent started in our community. Some of the great things that are happening. How do we continue that? How do we look for someone with those similar qualities? That's the opportunity. This will be the opportunity, June 30th. If people, which I think is very sweet and I think is very needed, and for a lot of people to get their feelings out about someone wishing to retire. I've been in that situation before. And if you're convincing someone, we have a little while to work on that, but we have to move forward in this process. And so I think this meeting is to hear from our community and where they want us to go and the direction they want us to go. But the legal perspective of this, it is not my place as a board member to tell someone they cannot retire. And so just make sure our messaging is clear for this meeting on the 30th. Thank you.
Okay, we will do. I will get with Superintendent and Mr. Bridges, and we need to make sure how we craft the public notice. Is that what you're saying, Ms. Miller?
Yes, thank you. And I referred to Wes, and Wes, you may need to speak up here, because it is going to be on how it's noticed. And that we may have lacked that in the previous meeting because of the misunderstanding of something else. So Wes, do you have input on what I forwarded you? Because I was concerned. I want to meet the needs of our public.
Yes, I hope you got my return last night. There does seem to be confusion over whether the superintendent is resigning or retiring. It was clear from the letter that she mailed that she intended to retire. And she certainly has enough time in the Florida retirement system to do that with full retirement. And it is her decision to make. The board does not accept or deny a request for retirement. That is the decision made by the individual. So you cannot compel someone to continue working if they choose to take retirement and are eligible to do so. We'll be careful in the notice. We're really not going. We won't be addressing in the notice retirement versus resignation. That's already been made clear. In the notice, we will simply indicate that we have a special school board meeting for the purpose of allowing of having this discussion and allowing public comment. But the message the superintendent sent to the school board was retirement, not resignation, and I would suggest that is the basis of the conversation going forward.
Thank you, Mr. Bridges, and thank you, Ms. Miller. And Ms. Fields?
Okay, I wanted to just say two things. I agree with you, Ms. Cunningham. We don't need to be spending 10 minutes giving our opinion on what we think the qualifications need to be for the superintendent of schools or the process. That's where we have our workshops, and we'll have plenty and ample enough time as a board to share what we want to see in a superintendent of schools and what the qualifications need to be when we hire the consulting firm to help us walk through that process. So I want to make sure I don't plan on doing no 10 minutes. I don't think that it's even respectful of the public. Let them come and let them have their comments. And whatever comments they have, we can't control what they say. We can't gauge what they say. If they want to talk about why they don't think the superintendent needs to leave, then that's their right. If they want to say that they think she needs to leave, that's their right as well. Now, I looked at this slide this morning and my heart just got heavy because in my opinion, but it's just mine, we should not even be going through this process. This is a tedious process and it's going to be a long process, but we should not even be going through it, but we are. We have to deal with it and go forward. Personally, I'm like Mr. Hill. I wish that Ms. Bird would change her mind, but I don't think, I can't answer that. Only she can. I'm not going to put her on the spot in a public meeting and ask her that. If I want to ask her that, I'll have a private meeting with her and ask her to do so. But at the end of the day, I agree with everyone else. We do need to start moving forth. But in moving forth, we need to make sure that we're mindful of listening to our community leaders, our community members, our staff, so that they can say at the end of the day that we were willing to listen. We might not agree with them, but at least we're willing to listen.
Thank you, Ms. Fields. Ms. Reynolds?
Ms. Fields just said part of what I was going to say. That is just that I don't think we can control what the public comes to say to us when we advertise. The best messaging in the world, I think we're still going to have a couple dozen people coming to tell us that they don't want Superintendent Byrd to leave. So I don't know that there's any way to get around that, because I think the community is very supportive of her and still thinks they have a chance she might stay. So we can put it in the messaging, but I don't know that the public will necessarily adhere to only talking about the future.
Thank you, Ms. Reynolds. And yeah, I would have to agree. I mean, I think it's an opportunity for our community to say how they feel. And with Superintendent obviously in the room, I think it's important. We've had this situation before and it's just part of the process. So I'm happy that we're going to be moving forward on June 30th with that. And we'll try to get correct public notice set up to do that. And I just appreciate everybody making the time. I know it's summertime, but this is very important. And I don't know who asked it, but I do feel like the timeline is good. We can talk about that the next time we meet, but I think we're solid. So I think we'll be able to accomplish what we want, but it will certainly be a decision of the board as far as actual timing. As Ms. Messina indicated, you know, you look to the end and you kind of plan backwards, and we can all do that as a board together. But sitting here as your chair and having been through this process several times, I feel like we'll be fine to have someone in place prior to the holidays this year. So any other comments or questions? Seeing none, I just remind everybody that our next meeting is on June the 16th with a work session beginning at 9 a.m. and our board meeting at 12:30. And hope to see everyone there. I'm not sure if that should be still another Zoom or in person, but Superintendent and Wes and I will talk and we will let you know. So with all that, y'all have a wonderful day and thank you so much for attending our meeting this morning. And this meeting is now adjourned.